Good evening. Tonight we're learning Maseches Eruvin Daf Pei Zayin. Tonight we're going to be continuing the sugya that we learned yesterday without sharing yesterday's picture. Yesterday we learned about a bore, a pit of water that straddled the property line between two chatzeros, and we were discussing whether or not it would be appropriate for each person within each respective chatzer to use that water. Now, the last shita that we saw was the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that if this bore of water straddled the two properties of Chatzar 1 and Chatzar 2, that whatever door jamb was over the water could halachically be considered the mechitza, and therefore you didn't need to do anything special. So on that, we're going to be starting tonight. We're 2/3 of the way down on Pevav Amud Beis, and we're at the words V'im Tomar. It says the Gemara, V'im Tomar, if what you're saying is true, we'll see what the words V'im Tomar is referring to. V'im Tomar, Osa Ma'aser Shenase B'Tzipori Al Pi Mi Naaseh. What took place in Tzipori, according to whom would that have been the halacha? So we don't know what we're talking about here because we don't know the Ma'aser of Tzipori yet. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is 2 inches above where we are, halfway down within the Rashi's Dibur Hamaskal V'im Tomar. V'im Tomar, Hol v'Rabbi Yossi l'gabe Shabbos less mechitza tluya. We spoke about yesterday that because Rabbi Yossi does not hold a mechitza tluya, so then what about the Ma'aser Shenase B'Tzipori? Rashi says, Al Yedei mechitza tluya kedei amrinon lekaman, as we will soon see. That was talking about a mechitza tluya. So if Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold of mechitza tluya, and the story in Tzipori was about a mechitza tluya, so then who was it? So it says the Gemara, Lo al pi Rabbi Yossi, Ella al pi Rabbi Shmuel b'Rabbi Yossi nase. It was based on his son's shita of Rabbi Shmuel, who went against his father. Halacha l'maisa, it's permissible for a child who is of caliber to paskin a shayla against his father. It just has to be done within the gedarim of the halachos in Yoredea about Hilchos Kibbut Aveim to make sure that it's not violating any of those mitzvos, any of those isurim, I should say. But that's what happened here. Dichi asa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi got to Eretz Yisrael, Amar, Pamachas shechacho v'lo heviu sefer Torah mi be'od yom. There was one time where they forgot to prepare a sefer Torah. What was the context? Rashi here, an inch below, Dibur Hamaskal heviu sefer Torah. Rashi says, heviu sefer Torah. They forgot to bring a sefer Torah lebeis hakneses. Uvechatzer acheres hava. It was in another chatzer. So that was the case. You were bringing the Sefer Torah through a chatzer that was not me'urav. So what's the din? So the machar in the morning, Shabbos morning, parsu sadin al ha'amudin. They laid out these sheets in order to make some types of makeshift mechitza. They view Sefer Torah b'karubo, and that's how they got the chatzer through the. That's how they got the Sefer Torah through the chatzer that was not me'urav. Says the Gemara, parsu lechatchila mishari. Come on, you can't build a temporary mechitza on Shabbos. Hakol modin, we learned this already somewhere. Where did we learn this? Shabbos Kuf Chapei and Kuf Lamed Zayin, and on this Masechta on Mem Daled, writes the Maseches Hashas here. We've seen it a few times. So it says the Gemara, it can't be that that's what happened because 8 lines, 7 lines from the bottom. Hakol modim she'ein osen ohel harai b'Shabbos. That's considered an ohel harai, and you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. So if that's the case, what was the actual case? Because it couldn't be that. How did they get the Sefer Torah from one chatzer through an eruv, through a chatzer that was not me'urav? Answers the Gemara, El mitzos sedinin perusin al ha'amudin. They already found that there was an eruv that was already made, not an eruv mechitza that was already made. They view Sefer Torah v'karubo, and that is how they solved that problem of the Sefer Torah, which is that there were already mechitzos in place, and that prevented them from needing to actually build the mechitzos, which would have been usher because it would have been an ohel harai, which you are not allowed to do. Very good. Amar Rabba. Rabba is going to take a unique perspective here. We're going to analyze it, and we're going to see if it makes any sense. Amar Rabba. Rabba says as follows. Rabbi Yehuda from our Mishnah. Remember the Rabbi Yehuda that we spoke about, that we started with today. The bore traverses that line from Chatzar 1 to Chatzar 2. Rabbi Yehuda says we don't need any extra mechitzas. The door jamb is good achis. We can rely on the fact that the door jamb goes to the bottom. It functions as a mechitza as it relates to the water in the bore. The person who lives, the houses that dump into Chatzar 1 can use the water, as can the houses that dump into Chatzar 2. So the Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Chanina ben Akavya Amru Davar Echad. They both seem to say the same thing. This is the sheet of Rabbah. Rabbi Yehuda Hade Amran. Rabbi Yehuda was what's in our Mishnah, the case that I just described. The door jamb drops and you can use the mechitza. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya, he actually had a little bit of a different shita. I used to have a piece of paper here. Let me just grab one here because we're going to need it. Because the Gemara is hard to understand. It took me a very long time to figure this out. It was not so easy. I hope I understand it now. So it says the Gemara as follows. Ditznan, it says Ditznan, it's actually Ditanya. And there can be a nafkamina between Ditznan and Ditanya, not in that they're Tanaim, because they're both Tanaim, but it could be in Psak. Let's say you have a Brisa and a Mishnah, and there's a variation. So we typically follow Mishnayos over Brisos. So here it's important to catch these types of errors in the transmission of the Masorah. And this is not a Mishnah, it is a Brisa. Let's see what Reb Chananya says. This is 2 lines from the bottom of Pei Vav, Amud Beis. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya Omer, Gezuztra sheyesh ba arba amos al arba amos. Let's say that you have a porch that is 4 amos by 4 amos. And here's a picture to share on Zoom. You're welcome to look at the screen. And here we have the papers in front of us. So it's 4 by 4. This is the top picture. All the way to the right side, your house is right off the sheet, and this is your porch. It's an aerial view. You're looking straight down at the porch. You can see there are open doors to entrance to the house. So this is your porch. Every square here is 2 tfachim. And if you look to the left of the box, it says in the brackets, Dalet Amos, which is equivalent to Kaf Dalet Tfachim. Just every Amma is 6 tfachim, according to some Tanai. So that's the case of Reb Chananya. He says that a gezuz sheyesh ba arba amos al arba amos, turning to the top of Pezayin Amud Aleph, chokek ba dalet al dalet mamale. You can cut a hole in the middle of the porch of 4 by 4 and drop a bucket in and draw up water that's underneath. No problem. Take a look at the picture. It says, if you look in the very center, it says nekev lemayim. I cut a hole there. Each square is 2 tfachim. The square is 4 by 4. And that's all we see here. Now, we need Rashi for this, so I've drawn some red lines there from the Yud Tfachim on the top and on the bottom of the Nekev, because Rashi here highlights something critical. My handwriting is not as good as the print in the Gemaras, so feel free to follow along inside. Rashi says on the top line, toward the end of the line, Rashi says, how does this work? Namely, where are the mechitzas here that allow us to draw up the water? We normally assume that water is a carmelis. So where's your mechitza? You can carry on your porch, but how do you get the water from the water? How do you get the water from the water itself if the water itself is a carmelis? How do you get it from down there to on the porch? So here Rashi says as follows. Second, the top line of Rashi toward the end. V'roen osan. The way that we look at this is as follows. Ki'ilu hein kfufin lemata ke'ein mechitza tluya al hamayim. Okay, so part number 1, where you see above the Nekev Lamayim in the picture, where it says Yud Tfachim, it's as if that bends downward toward the water, and on the other side, it bends downward toward the water. So now you have 2 downward protrusions of 10 Tfachim next to the Nekev Lamayim. The same would be true to the left of the Nekev Lamayim, where there's also 10 Tfachim between the Nekev Lamayim and the left wall. And we have our 4th wall would be the house. Namely, we need to have a proper set of boundaries to allow us to carry the water from the Carmelis into our rishus, from the water into our rishus. The mechitza tluya turns the water from a Carmelis into a rishus hayachid. So the 10 tfachim above the Nekev Lamayim, and the 10 tfachim below the Nekev Lamayim, and the 10 tfachim to the left of the Nekev Lamayim. All of them, if you can imagine like an origami exercise, it's as if the porch folds down. That's what the Rashi here calls kfufin. The din is that we treat it as though the floor bends down to become a chitza tzluya. Continues Rashi, ve'amrinan, and we added a second dinin called good achid. So they're both halachos l'moshe misinai. Number 1, we have this idea called kfufin. How do we create mechitzas for the water? So we theoretically assume that because there's 10 tfachim on all sides of the Nekev Lamayim, they all ki'ilu bend downwards, and then we have a mechitza tzluya. Very good. A 2-step process for Reb Chananya ben Akavya. The first is kfufin, that we assume that the floors bend down to make a mechitza tzluya. And step 2 is good achis, that we assume that the distance from the bottom of that bent floor will reach the water, and that is considered totally fine. Very good. Okay, so that is the picture there on the left side. Now, what was the Gemara trying to do? The Gemara was trying to say that this is the same as Rabbi Yehuda. How is this case the same as Rabbi Yehuda? Well, the Havamin of the Gemara is that the case of Rabbi Yehuda that we learned in our Mishnah yesterday is that because the water traverses both chatzeros and there's a door jamb that goes over the bore, we just assume good achis. We assume that the wall drops. Well, don't we assume the same thing here by the mechitza tluya? We assume that the wall drops. That was Rabba's Havamina as to why Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Chananya ben Akavya are the same. But says the Gemara on the top line of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, Paz, Omar Le Abaye, he says the Dilma Lohi, maybe your comparison between Rabbah and Rabbi Yehuda is not a good comparison. Why is it not a good comparison? Says the Gemara as follows. Second line, Pei Zayin Aleph. Ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Yehuda hasam. Maybe the only reason why Rabbi Yehuda was lenient by the bor, to say that the door jamb has the din of good achis, to allow the Baalei Achatzer to benefit from the bor mayim that traverses the two chatzeros, that's hasam ella to amar good achis mechitzta, because we only rely on the principle of good achis. However, aval, in the case of Rav Chananya ben Akavya, Kov vigod lo. We don't say this unique din of allowing the floor to bend to become your mechitza tuluya, and then secondly to add another halacha l'Moshe Sinai of good achis that the mechitza tuluya would then reach the wall. We don't allow for the doubling up of those halachos. And as well, the ad kan, maybe we could argue lo ka'amar Rav Chananya ben Akavya hasam el b'yama shel tferia. Maybe Rav Chananya ben Akavya would only have allowed both kov and god, the bending of the floors to make the mechitza tluya, and good achis to make the mechitza tluya reach the water. Maybe we would only have said that in Tveria. Why? With the waters of Tveria. What was the Metzias back in the day? Because that water, hoel v'yeshla ognaim, it had a rim to it. The ayoros v'karfefios makifos was surrounded by cities and by closed off areas. So maybe there was a different din there, but it doesn't apply to regular water. Aval, bishar memos lo. So Abaye rejects Rabbah's havamina. Rabbah thought Rabbi Yehuda from yesterday and Rav Chananya ben Akavya of today were the same because of good achis. Says the Gemara, no comparison for two reasons. Number one, Rabbi Yehuda only needs good achis. Rav Chananya ben Akavya needs both kof and good achis, and that's not comparable. And number two is because maybe the case of Rav Chananya ben Akavya only applied to Yom HaShel Tveria. Fourth line, the Gemara here now, fifth line, excuse me, the Gemara says, Amar Abaye, uledivrei Rav Chananya ben Akavya, we actually have three cases of applying the principles of Rav Chananya ben Akavya to different cases. One of them is our case. Here's another three. Says the Gemara, Uledivrei Rav Chananya ben Akavya, I could give you another scenario where we can rely on kof, the bending of the floors, and rely on good achis, and then we can have our cut hole in the middle of our porch, or maybe not in the middle of our porch, maybe right next to our porch, right next to our door. Maybe we could figure that out where we could then have the four mechitzas that are required to turn the water from a karmelis into a rishus hayachid to allow for the drawing up of water through that cut hole from the water into your chatzar on Shabbos, onto your porch. What's the case? Says the Gemara. Hayasa smucha lekosel. Let's say that you have a porch, but it's smucha lekosel. It's not perfectly aligned to your doorway. Like in the back of my house, I have a sliding door, and when you walk out, your first step is onto the porch. But let's say that you had a distance of less than 3 tfachim. Says the Gemara, smucha bekosel bepachos migimel tfachim. If you look at the picture on the bottom, you'll see that the porch starts a little bit pushed off of the wall. You have two beams holding up the porch. So it's less than 3. And if you look right next to in the very first row on the right, you'll see that there's a 4x4 space for the cut in the ground. So that's our case here. We have the space of 4x4 for the kosel, for the nekev l'mayim, right in the very middle of that page on the right, the middle of that second picture. And every other part of the wood, of the flooring, is within 3 tfachim. And then says the Gemara, smucha lekosel b'pachos migimel tfachim, tzarich sheyehei orka daled amos v'rochba achadasar mashu. That too would be a case. And if you look at the picture, you can see how it would work out, that we would be able to also have our 4 mechitzas. What would be the 4 mechitzas? Well, 3 of them are circled in red in picture number 2. One of them is 10 tfachim above the center point. One of them is 10 tfachim below the center point. One of them is 10 tfachim from the very opening of the nekev l'mayim all the way to the left, and the other is the house itself. Okay, good. That's one of the new cases. Here's another case. We are 7 lines down. Haisa zekufa. Let's say that the flooring was actually stood up in another direction. So then, tzarich sheyehi gofa asara tfachim v'rochba vav tfachim u'shnei mashuhuyin. If we have the flooring standing up, it's 10 tefach tall, and it's 6 tefach wide, then Rashi highlights we could manipulate this to also be a scenario, the shnei mashuhuyin, where you have the lavud aspect going on, where you're approximately 3 tefachim off of the wall, and it plays into the depth of the wall, which is 6 plus tefachim. So 6 plus tefachim plus 2.9 is 10, and that's how you would get your walls in that direction. And it's 10 in the other direction anyway. So you have your 4 walls that way, and that is yet another case. And the third case which applies is in the name of Rav Huna, Amar Rav Huna Berei Rav Yoshua, Hayasa Omedes Bekeren Zavis. Let's say that your porch is up against 2 house walls. The 2 cases we've been dealing with is when your porch protrudes off of 1 house wall. But what if I'm the corner and you have I'm the corner here. It's 2 house walls like this. It's like putting your sukkah up against an L shape in your house. Great. 2 of your walls are solved for. You don't have to try as hard. So that's the case here as well. Amar Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua Haysa Omedes Bekeren Zavis. If it's 10 tefach tall, the rochba base tefachim u'shnei mashuin. If it's 2 tefach, if the width is 2 tefach deep and it has 2 mashus on its side, we can also do all of the math. We have 2 walls that are natural, 4 walls that are built with a mix of the 10 tefachim and the hole, of course, that you're going to make for the neck of lamayim, and using lavud. And you can. This is now our 4th case that we have here that would work within the world of Rav Chananya ben Akavia. So asks the Gemara, you just presented me 3 cases that are way less significant in size than our starting point. Just look at the 2 pictures on the map. These 2 pictures are drawn to scale. So the first picture that we have on the top is 24 tefachim by 24 tefachim. The second picture that we have is totally different in size. It's a totally different measurement. It's 24 wide, it's 4 almost long, but its depth is only 11 and a little bit. So it asks the Gemara like this, hold on one second. The Bryce of Rav Chananya reads, Rav Chananya ben Akavia Omer, only if it's a very large porch, 4 by 4. That's when we cut the hole in the middle of 4 tefach by 4 tefach umemale. So then, how do all of these cases work? So answers the Gemara, the cases are just different. The 3 cases that we're discussing here on this page are different than the Brisa because the Avida Kiasisa, they're made differently. And if you look at Rashi, the Avida Kiasisa, this Rashi is the last Rashi before the Mishnah. It's about 2/3 of the way down, about 8 lines into the wide lines. Dibur Hamaschil de'avida ke'asisa, says Rashi, she'ein kosel samuchla. It's a little off from the wall. The kova al yesedos, the flooring is built on pegs that extend from the wall. V'tzarach lios kol chalala, the kol mechitzoseh mimena v'naseh ke'in maducha. It has a shape of a certain kli, but the point is that the reason why the initial case was 24 by 24 tfachim was because the nekev l'mayim was in the middle. All of the other cases, the nekev l'mayim was much closer to the wall, so the depth of the porch could be less in all of those cases. Very good. So today, so far, what we've learned, we tried in the name of Rabbi to compare Rabbi Yehuda from yesterday to the top picture because they both rely on good achis mechitzta, and we answer in the name of Abai. That doesn't work. Abai then adds 2 more cases. Rav Huna adds a 3rd case where we can apply the same principles of Rav Chananya ben Akavia, and let's continue with the next din. Says the Mishnah 1/3 of the way down on Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Amas Mayim, you have an aqueduct. We're used to and blessed to have pipes of running water. Usually that's a wonderful thing. So here, some of their water was above ground. If you've ever done tours in Eretz Yisrael, you've seen remnants of aqueducts, those kinds of things. So let's say that this was back in the day. This is how they'd get water. They'd build an aqueduct system, and during the week you can happily take from it. But are you allowed to draw water from an aqueduct on Shabbos? Well, the water came from elsewhere, and maybe it's a Carmelis. Maybe it's not yours. So we have to discuss some of that. So says the Mishnah as follows. Amas hamayim an aqueduct. Shehi overes b'chatzer. It passes through your chatzer. So the halacha is, what do we do from the aqueduct? Says the Mishnah, ein memalin heimena b'Shabbos. You may not fill up your canteen with water from the aqueduct. Ela im kain asu lemechitza gavoa yutfachim beknisa uviyitzia. This is reminiscent of our Mishnah from yesterday. We said there was a board that traverses the 2 mechitzas, and we said, at least according to the Tanakama and Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, you need mechitza of some kind in the water, above the water line, or out. So you need it somewhere. Okay, so the same would be true here. What should we then expect? The leniency of Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no. Kosel sha'al gaba tidon mishu mechitza. If there's a door jam or some kind of, let's say it goes through your wall and you built a space for the aqueduct to run, worth your while to have running water in your backyard. Wonderful. So what should you do in such a case? Nothing. You can rely on the fact that that there's a door jam that there's a built-in mechitza, you don't have to do anything according to Rabbi Yehuda. And in fact, a maisa shahaya, says the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, maisa ba'ama shel Evel. Evel was a location. There was an aqueduct there, and shahaya memalin mimena al pi zakenim b'Shabbos. And there they said, according to the zakenim, according to the chachamim of the city, that it's mutter to draw water from there on Shabbos. And Rabbi Yehuda is like, I proved myself. You think that when the aqueduct runs through your mechitza, you need a mechitza beginning and end of your chutzner to make sure that you can take out water. No, you don't. I have a raya. I have a raya from the city of Evel. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Amru lo, mipnei shelo haya ba kishir. No, the only reason why that was true in that city of Evel was because the aqueduct was too small. It didn't have the din of a karmelis because a karmelis has to be dalet tvachim. This was smaller. What's smaller? Makom tur. So therefore, it was not a problem in our Mishnah. No raya to Rabbi Yehuda. Opens the Gemara. We're not going to learn a lot of Tanaim here. We're going to see two significant sources in the Tanaim. The first is a reflection of our Mishnah, and the second, an extension of our Mishnah. Says the Gemara as follows: Tan Rabbanan, halfway down, Pei Zayin Vad Aleph. What does the Gemara say? Very similar. Asula b'knisa, v'lo asula b'yitzia. Let's say that the aqueduct is running through your chatzer, and you forgot. You only put up one mechitza by the knisa, not by the yitzia. Or asula b'yitzia, v'lo asula b'knisa. Well, vice versa. You put one at each end, but you forget to do both. So you lost out. Ein memalach ha'men b'Shabbos. So in kin asula mechitza yud tvachim yitzia b'knisa. So Tanakama writes, you have to do a mechitza by the beginning and mechitza by the end. No, you forgot one, your fault. You can't draw water from
up the water.
What? No, it's not in the water. Great question. Sorry, I didn't say that. You're not building mechitza in the water. You're building a mechitza near the water. It may be above the water on the aqueduct, possible, and maybe you have to go into the previous Mishnah and see how our machlokes that we saw yesterday between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yehuda, how do they understand Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? You may have to get into that and how it would apply to this case. You're correct. It's not in the water to stop it. Obviously, that's not the case, but a very important ha'ara because I forgot to say it. So that's what the Gemara is talking about here, is that somewhere next to the entrance of the aqueduct into your yard, and before it exits your yard, you need to have mechitzas on both sides. If you forget one, too bad. This brisa adds Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kosel Sha'al Gaban Tidon Mishum Mechitza, same as our Mishnah. So this brisa reflects our Mishnah and a similar story. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Ma'aseh Ba'amas Samayim Sha'isa Ba'a Me'evel Etzipori. So here there's a little more color and detail in this brisa than there is in our Mishnah. We knew where the aqueduct was coming from and going to. The aqueduct was flowing from Evel to Tzipori. So what was it then? People were drawing water from the aqueduct on Shabbos. Al Pi Hazakenim, with the psak from the Gedolim of the town of Evel. We see Rabbi Yehuda's right again. Amrulo misham raya, no raya. Mipnei shelo haisa amuka yud tvachim v'roch v'dalet. Similar answer to our Mishnah, but again with a little more detail, and that is that this aqueduct was not 10 by 4. It was not a Carmelis. It was in fact a Malkum Tur, and therefore no raya. Next source, Tanya Idach. We have another brisa. Amas hamayim overes ben achalonos. You have an aqueduct that you can reach through the windows of your home. So if it's pachos mi gimel, we don't know what the word pachos is referring to. But if it's pachos mi gimel, if it's less than 3, so then mishal shel deliyum mamale. If the distance is less than 3, again, we don't know if is it the window to the aqueduct, is it the depth of the aqueduct? We have to see what we're talking about. That's a machlokes in the Gemara. So mishal shel deliyum mamale. If it's less than 3, then you can take a pitcher and scoop out of the aqueduct. Gimel. What if in fact this measurement is 3? So then ein mishal shel deliyum mamale. Then you're not allowed to draw up water with a pitcher. In contrast to this shita, Rashbag Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Pachos Midalid Mishal Shel Deliyum Mamale. If the distance again, we don't know what we're talking about. If it's less than 4, then Mishal Shel Deliyum Mamale. Then you are allowed to scoop down into the water. Dalid. What if in fact it is 4? So then Ein Mishal Shel Deliyum Mamale. Then you're not allowed. Now, we've learned a couple of times already. There's the Machlokes Tanoim about what is the number for lavud. Is the number for lavud 3 tvachim or up to 4? And Rashbag is the one who holds up to 4. So the wheels should be turning a little bit, that we should be thinking that maybe this is really talking about lavud, and we'll have to see how this actually plays out. So it says the Gemara as follows, B'maya Skinon. We are 5 lines from the bottom, Pei Zayin Vad Aleph. What do we mean here when we see this machlokes between the Rabbanan and Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, that the Rabbanan hold that if it's less than 3, then it's mutter to scoop out. More than 3, you're not allowed to take from the aqueduct. And Rashbag says the same halachos, but with 4 as the breaking point. B'maya Skinon. Ilema the amas hamayim gufa. If you want to say that the measurement that they're looking at is how wide is the actual aqueduct, is it 3 or is it 4? Rabbanan versus Rashbag? No. Ve'alaha dechi asa Rav Dini amar Rav Yochanan and Karmelis pchus midalid. No. Rav Yochanan told us that there's no such thing as a mechitza, as a carmelis, that's pchus midalid. So you can't tell me that what the Rabbanan and the Rashbag are arguing about is the number 3 or 4 applying to the aqueduct. Because everyone agrees that if it's less than 4, it's not a carmelis. In which case, kasha on the Rabbanan, how could you say that above 3 is usher? It's not a carmelis, it's a makom tur, which means that we can't say that the number 3 is referring to the actual width of the aqueduct. Says the Gemara, would we say lema ketanoi amr l'shmaisa? You'd say there's a machlokes about that, about Rav Yochanan's din? No way. Ella, it must be talking about be'ad pei ulahachlif. We must be talking about the ground that supports the aqueduct, the embankment that holds up the aqueduct, and that is what we're talking about. Is what is the size of that? Says the Gemara. Oh, and ulahachlif, and whether or not we are allowed to use it to switch things from one reshus to another, which is a conversation that we're going to get into right now. So says the Gemara, you think it's about the embankment? V'haki asa Rav Dimi, Amar Rav Yochanan. When Rav Dimi came to Bavel, he said in the name of Rav Yochanan, Makom she'ein bo arba al arba, where you have a space that's less than 4 by 4 in area. Mutter livnei reshus hayachid v'livnei reshus rav l'katev alav u'bilvad shelo yachlifu. You want to tell me that the embankment is less than 4? But if the embankment is less than 4, then we have another din of Rav Yochanan that less than 4 by 4, you're allowed to be machlef, no problem. You're allowed to be makatev, no problem. So again, it shouldn't be a problem at all. It should be fine even with 3 tvachim, because this is less than 4. So says the Gemara, no, come on. That case is not comparable to our case. Why? Hasam, over there, where Rav Yochanan says that if it's 4 by 4, you can be makatev, but you can't be machlif, that you're allowed to lean up against that and adjust your backpack. That's Hasam Rishuyas Deoraisa. That's only dealing with Rishuyas that are Deoraisa. As we turn to the top of Pezayin and Bey, says the Gemara, but Hacha, what's our case? Our case is Rishuyos Derabanan. Our case is talking about something totally different, and therefore not comparable. Says the Gemara, you mean to say that Rav Yochanan's din of Rishus Hayachid that doesn't apply to Dinei Derabanan? You're saying that his din of the din of Carmelis doesn't apply to this, wouldn't apply to a world of Derabanan? That's not true. This is a lengthy 15-line question, step by step. Follow along. Top line, Pezayin Amud Beis. The Rav Yochanan Rishus Derabanan Nami Amar. Rav Yochanan also said this din that one is allowed to be makatev, even when it's with Dinei Derabanan. Titania, a brisa that we've seen, but it's really not Ditanya. If you look at that, goes to Tzionim, it's Ditnan. This is a Mishnah that we learned. Kosel shebein beis chatzeros. Let's say that you have 2 chatzeros, mine and yours. There's a wall that separates us, and it's 10 tvachim tall, and it's 4 tvachim deep. So then, me'arvin shnai ve'im me'arvin echad. We cannot bind together even if we wanted to. The wall is too significant. Hayu berosho peiros. If on top of that 10 tefach wide by 4 tefach deep wall, there's fruits. So we said, Eilu olam mikan ve'ochlin, ve'eilu olam mikan ve'ochlin. The bnei chatzer from each side can climb up on the wall and eat the fruits, no problem. What if nifras hakosel? What if the wall breaks? So ad eser amos ma'arvin shnayim v'im ratzu ma'arvin echad mipnei shu kepesach. If you have a break in the wall and it's up to 10, like regular rules of a broken wall, that's considered like a pesach. And then we can choose, do we want to be ma'arv separately or together? No problem. Because that's treated like a Pesach. Yoser mikan. What if the pirta is greater than 10 tefachim? So then me'arvin echad, ve'ein me'arvin shnayim. Then the pirta is so great that we can't say that we could ever be ma'arev, separately. We have to be ma'arev together. Ve'havinan ba, what ein bo arba mai. What if the wall wasn't 4 tefachim wide in that case of the wall that separates us in the case of the kosel? So that's a machlokas amoraim. And here's where we're going to get to our question. Amar Rav says, Avir beis reshuyos shaletes bobelo yaziz bobelo melonima. No, you're not. If it's less than 3 tvachim, then the people in Chatzar 1 and the people in Chatzar 2, they're not allowed to benefit from what's on top of that wall. If you look at melonima, you can't even move it 1 hair. What does Rav Yochanan hold? Rav Yochanan Amar Elu malin mikan ve'ochlin ve'elu malin mikan ve'ochlin. So we see that Rabbi Yochanan has this din in the case of Carmelis, even when it's a din derabanan, not only by Rishus Hayachid and Rishus Harabim, even by a categorical Carmelis. The wall is 10 tefach wide and 3 tefach deep. That's a Carmelis. All right, so then it should all work out. I should say it's not a Carmelis, but it's a status of midirabanan. So we see that this works out. But Rabbi Yochanan on the time we're 1/3 of the way down on Pezayin of the base. Rabbi Yochanan on the time asa Rabdimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan makom she'ein bo arba al arba when there is not 4x4. In this case, the wall is less than 4. Muter lebnei rishus harabim ulebnei rishus hayachid lakatef alavu lashlo yachlifu. So we see that Rabbi Yochanan was in fact of the opinion that that you'd be mutter to be mekatef. So then that brings us back to our initial question that we had asked. We had said against the suggestion that maybe the number 3, as it relates 3 or 4, the Machlokes, Rashbag, and the Rabbanan, maybe that was only talking about the width of the embankment. Maybe. So then now we need to come back to our initial question. Why can't it be Rav Yochanan? So says the Gemara, because Hahi Ze'ira Amra. It was a Talmud of Ze'ira, a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan, whose name was Ze'ira, who said it. And says the Gemara, that is not an answer. Ula Ze'iri Kasha, where do you think he learned it? He learned it from his Rabbi Rabbi Yochanan. So you still haven't answered any problems yet. Says the Gemara, no. Ha Ze'iri mokim la ba'amas hamayim gufa. No, he was not talking about the embankment. Ze'iri was talking different than his Rebbe. He was talking about not the embankment, but back to our initial Havamina, that maybe it was actually the width of the actual aqueduct that was the machlok between Rashbag and the Rabbanan. Says the Gemara, V'Ravdimi Tanoihi. And the Shita of Ravdimi was subject to a machlokes Tanoi. So asks the Gemara, why would we not then treat this like Chore Karmelis? Like we learned about Chore Rishus Harabim, Maseches Shabbos. What if a person has Chore Rishus Harabim? They have their own status. Why don't we have Chore Karmelis as well? So the answer to that is that Abaye says, Abaye bar Avin, Reb Chanina bar Avin, Damar Tarvayu ein Chor in the Karmelis. They hold that there are no Chor in the Karmelis. The din of a cutout in a wall is only a din in Rishus Harabim, or Rishus Hayachid, I guess, but it does not apply to a Karmelis. So that would be a big nafkamina. Let's say that you have a Rishus Harabim that has a cutout, and I throw something against that wall and it lands in the cutout, I might be chayiv. In a Karmelis, it's nothing. It doesn't count at all. It doesn't count at all. Now, and Ravashi has a different answer to this question about Chore Karmelis. Ravashi Amar halfway down. Afilu tema yesh chor in the Karmelis. We could even say that there are Chore Karmelis, that we would treat the holes of a Karmelis a little bit differently. But hani mili bismucha, it's only when it's close. Hacha. But here with the aqueduct, it's b'ufleges, and therefore we wouldn't apply it here. And lastly, Ravina Amar. Ravina says, going back to our initial question of what is the machlokas between Rashbag and the Rabbanan, Ravina Amar, kigon ta'avad la nifke apuma. You did make some type of curb, some type of small little system next to the aqueduct. Really, then it all falls back on a question of lavud. If the wall that you made was within dalet tfachim, so then dalet tfachim is Rashbag, then it would be mutter. If it's within 3 tfachim, that would be good according to Reb Shimon, according to the Tanakh, according to the Rabbanan. The only nafkamina would be between exactly the number 3 and up to the number 4, where we'd have a leniency by Rashbag and we would have a stringency by the Rabbanan. That brings us to the next Mishnah. We'll stop here. Mir Hashem, tomorrow we will pick up with the new Mishnah on Pei Zayin and a Beis and learn a blot and a half. And Mir Hashem, finishing the parak. Have a beautiful night.